think, Marge. All I need is a title.
In this issue of Politics City's electoral coverage of the 2018 midterm elections, we will examine the primary races for the U.S. Senate coming up in the months of August and September. While there are some stories in the remaining U.S. Senate races, most of the incumbents, including some of the big names on the Democrat side, will get through the primary, and we are already able to make predictions on the general election based on the probable contenders from the opposing party. In Tennessee, former Democrat Governor Phil Bedreson currently leads Maria Blackburn by 6 points, according to an in-state poll. The poll had a margin of error of 4 points, and poll numbers tend to narrow as election day gets closer. Because this is an open seat, there is no incumbent advantage. With all this in mind, Politics City believes that Maria Blackburn will be able to trade a bit on the moderate popularity that President Donald Trump enjoys in the state and will be able to win the race in a squeaker. Here is some breaking news in the U.S. Senate race in Tennessee between Democrat Phil Bedreson and Republican Marsha Blackburn. Fox News has released a story stating that, quote, a top Tennessee Democrat Party communications official made disparaging comments about President Donald Trump and lashed out against a suggestion to reach out to his voters, describing them as, quote, idiots. The story continues. Mark Brown, a top communications official for the Tennessee Democratic Party, currently working as a leading spokesperson to help Democrat Phil Bedreson win the U.S. Senate race against Republican Marsha Blackburn, has made a number of over-the-top comments in social media, including calling the president fuckstick and Putin's bitch, the Washington Free Beacon revealed. Exactly fuck reaching out to Trump voters. The idiots aren't listening, Brown wrote in one of the tweets from 2017. In other tweets, he also called Trump a fucking moron and an insane fuck. My response is, first, I apologize for the language, but I wanted you to get the complete gist of the level of vitriol being leveled against a group of people simply because they support Donald Trump, they voted for Donald Trump, or they are Donald Trump. It is possible that this story will serve to dampen Bedreson's numbers, in which case, if he loses, he will only have Mark Brown to blame. Remember this moment from the 2016 campaign?
You know, to just be grossly generalistic, you could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it. And unfortunately, there are people like that.
Yeah, that gaffe pretty much single-handedly doomed her campaign. You don't get elected to high office by ticking off a good portion of the population of your district. Sorry to inform you of this, Mr. Brown, but the idiots get to vote too. In Michigan, Republicans John James and Sandy Pensler are locked in a very close race, and if you go by the straight numbers, Pensler should win. However, neither GOP candidate is polling above 35%, while the Democrat incumbent, Debbie Stabenow, is polling at around 50%. Even though Donald Trump won the state in the 2016 election, and Michigan contributed to the break in the so-called blue wall, Michigan is still a very blue state, and Stabenow is also quite popular and should win the general election over either of the two GOP challengers. In Missouri, we have pretty much the big story of this episode, as GOP challenger Josh Hawley leads incumbent Democrat Claire McCaskill. McCaskill has always been a very weak politician in a state that has been slanted to the right, with a strong Republican Party. She won the 2012 election simply because the GOP put forward a candidate who blurted out the legitimate rape gaffe. Josh Hawley is a solidly stronger candidate, and McCaskill's luck may have run out. President Donald Trump has also campaigned heavily in the state and will probably do so again between now and November. Politics City believes that Josh Hawley will oust Claire McCaskill and her Senate seat will go into GOP hands. Maria Cantwell will be returning to Washington, D.C. because she is in a safe race against Republican Joey Gibson in Washington state. In both Hawaii and Connecticut, Democrats Mazie Hirono and Chris Murphy will be reelected to their seats safely. In Minnesota, both Amy Klobuchar and Tina Smith will win their seats, which is unfortunate for the GOP, which hoped to pick up a seat from Smith, who was appointed to her seat after the sex scandal that drove Al Franken from office. The issue here is that Minnesota is still safely a blue state, and it went for Hillary Clinton in 2016. The state's senatorial delegation has been Democrat for a long while, and the voters in Minnesota even elected Al Franken, who was barely a serious candidate. He was, however, a Democrat. In the most unsurprising race in this episode, Vermont will send independent Senator Bernie Sanders back to D.C. Sanders, the once and perhaps future presidential candidate, is perhaps the biggest name in the state, and can probably keep the seat for as long as he wants it. The next big story of this episode will happen in Wisconsin, where Republicans Kevin Nicholson and Leah Vukmir are vying for the opportunity to face off against incumbent Democrat Tammy Baldwin. This GOP primary is an extremely close race, with Vukmir leading by 2 points. However, either one of these candidates should be able to beat Tammy Baldwin, as she barely has a record of doing anything. She's also very weak on the issue of abuses at the Veterans Administration, where a lot of problems were found at the VA facilities in the state. When these issues were brought to Baldwin's office, nothing happened. This will be a major avenue of attack against Baldwin, who will also have to deal with the popularity of both the state's GOP governor, Scott Walker, and President Donald Trump, and the fact that the economy in the state is booming, with the start of construction of the Foxconn plant in Racine County. This remains a simple call for Politics City to make, and we predict that Vukmir will win the primary and then win the general election in November. It is hard for a Democrat to get elected to federal office in Wyoming. This is Gary Trauner's second attempt at running for the U.S. Senate, this time against incumbent Republican John Barrasso. While Barrasso has a primary challenger, he will win the primary solidly, and he will then go on to beat Trauner and retain his seat. In Arizona, there's a major fight for the seat being vacated by Jeff Flake. Currently, Martha McSally is leading Kelly Ward and Joe Arpaio by at least a 9-point margin. McSally will win this race and fill the seat until the next scheduled election. Perhaps the most interesting part of this story was the entry of Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio into the race, but Sheriff Joe will fall far short of his goal to win the Senate seat. In Florida, GOP contender Rick Scott is leading Democrat incumbent Bill Nelson by a point. Florida went for Trump in 2016, and Rick Scott will take advantage of this. Nelson has generally been a moderate Democrat, so Scott should be able to oust him simply by providing a bolder platform. Assuming the economy keeps growing as it is currently, and assuming that President Trump will campaign in the state, Politics City will predict that Rick Scott will win the seat. In the last month of primary elections, it will be a Democrat sweep, but a sweep in areas where such a thing is not a surprise. The September Senate primaries are all located in New England, where Democrat influence is still very strong. Setting up a presidential run in 2020, Senator Elizabeth Warren will win her primary in Massachusetts over a minimal GOP challenge. Because of a similarly minimal GOP challenge in Delaware, Democrat Tom Carper will win the seat in that state. In Rhode Island, the Democrat candidate Sheldon Whitehouse will handily beat Republican Bob Flanders to continue the run of liberals, either GOP or Democrat, in that state. Finally, in New York, Kristen Gillibrand leads all potential GOP challengers by at least 30 points, so her seat should be safe. With all these races in mind, we believe that the U.S. Senate will remain in GOP hands, and in fact, the majority will expand by a few seats. The Democrats will also fail to retake the U.S. House, in large measure because the far-left extremes have been dragging the party further from the mainstream for the past few months. At the beginning of the year, there was still a possibility that there would be a blue wave, and this would also fit the historical trend that the party in power during the midterms takes a bath and loses majorities in the Congress. The elections in 2006, 2010, and 2014 are the most recent examples of this. However, the Trump presidency and the policies and economics that have been put down since January 2017 are giving Republicans some motivation to go to the polls and elect more Republicans to Congress so that these policies can continue. At the same time, the Democrats have continued to rail against President Trump, the tax revisions in 2017, have continuously grandstanded against Trump to the point that they have opposed or voted against bills that would have greatly benefited their constituents. Some of the more outspoken voices in the Democrat Party have also stated their intent to impeach President Trump if they regain control of the U.S. House. All of this makes the decision to vote one way or another actually pretty clear, no matter which way you wish to vote. In some ways, both parties have been making their cases for electing their candidates since January of 2017. Politics City will produce at least one more episode before November, and then a follow-up episode after November 6th. Some people have said that this upcoming election is the most important midterm election that they've ever experienced. Given how much each party has divided itself from the other, and given the policies proposed from both, we can see how this can be the case. Either way you choose to vote, go out and vote in both your primary and general elections.